Tonight, a 2-hour phone call, but no real progress. So will Donald Trump lose interest in finding peace in Ukraine? The leaders of America and Russia agreed the need to move towards peace, with the White House keen to control the message.
We just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress has been made.
Keen to keep his battlefield gains, Russia's leader insists there needs to be compromise on both sides. So what exactly does Vladimir Putin want, and what would it mean for this ongoing war that has Europe on edge? Also coming up, in Gaza, thousands on the move as Israel bombards the second largest city and finally allows basic aid after international pressure. Also tonight, thank you for lifting me up, former US President Joe Biden's message to well-wishers after he was diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer. And we reveal what it was really like at Diddy's notorious white parties as his racketeering trial continues. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Tonight, I want to focus on two men, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. They had a long conversation today. It wasn't their first phone chat about the war in Ukraine, and it likely won't be their last. And with each interaction, Donald Trump is getting more and more frustrated at the lack of progress. After much hyped talks in Turkey, President Putin's no-show got this reaction.
Nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? We're going to have to get it solved because too many people are dying.
Well, what the US president really wants is a ceasefire, but that's not in Vladimir Putin's interest. So what we've seen today and what we saw last week is a Russian leader willing to play the long game, appearing to concede, but not giving away very much at all. He's banking on Donald Trump losing interest and moving on.
It's not our war. We're going to try to end it, but if we can't end it, we're eventually going to say, you know what, that was worth a try, but we're not doing it anymore.
That was Vice President Vance aboard Air Force Two after meeting Ukraine's leader. Well, as the fighting continues, it's exactly the message the Kremlin wants to hear from the White House. Tonight, we'll read between the lines of the messaging from Russia and Washington. But let's get started with this analysis from our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Bennett.
The clouds gathered in Moscow ahead of the call, but the storm never came. American pressure that was forecast apparently faded away, with the Kremlin once again untouched and unmoved. Vladimir Putin took the call at a music school, where his comments to the media afterwards revealed Russia's tune hasn't changed, show a willingness to achieve peace without actually agreeing to it.
We have agreed with the President of the United States that Russia will propose and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum on a possible future peace accord, defining a number of positions such as, for example, the principles of settlement, the timing of a possible peace agreement.
But still not the ceasefire Donald Trump demands. He's threatened sanctions on Russia and said he'd walk away from peace talks if there's no progress. But still no sign of either.
We just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress has been made. It's a terrible situation going on over there. 5,000 young people every single week are being killed. So hopefully we did something. We also spoke to the heads of most of the European nations, and we're trying to get that whole thing wrapped up. What a shame that it ever started in the first place.
And all the while, the war grinds on. Russian attacks were unrelenting in the build-up to the phone call, and a pause in the fighting remains as elusive as ever. It's 2 months since Donald Trump first called for a 30-day truce, and since then, very little has actually changed. Vladimir Putin continues to say that a ceasefire is possible, but only if certain conditions are met, like, for example, a halt to Western military aid to Ukraine. In short, it's still very much peace on Russia's terms and time frame. It seems the only thing Vladimir Putin did give Donald Trump in their conversation was warm words. The Kremlin said he congratulated the US president on the birth of his grandson, and apparently that's still enough.
Well, Ivor joins me now live from Moscow alongside our US correspondent James Matthews, who's in Washington. And Ivor, I'll come to you first because this very much feels like Vladimir Putin is playing his old game, stringing the West along and sending a message: you might have the watches, but I've got all the time in the world.
Yeah, it certainly seems so, and everything apparently once again is going in Russia's favour. Despite the promise to get tough on Vladimir Putin, American sanctions, American consequences and pressure were once again missing in action, with Donald Trump seemingly content to let Vladimir Putin off the hook and content to take him at his word. But the only thing he's actually said new on this phone call is this promise to work with Ukraine on this memorandum for a future peace deal. Well, that's really just a more formal way of saying, yes, Russia will continue to engage in a path towards a peace deal. It's really nothing more than that, certainly not a commitment for a ceasefire. And according to the Kremlin, Donald Trump did stress his desire for a quick ceasefire, a quick peace deal, but a timeline for a ceasefire wasn't discussed. And I think that really says it all. And no wonder Vladimir Putin described the call as informative and helpful, because he is still very much in the driving seat, very much calling the shots tonight. But I think what will alarm Ukraine and its European allies the most tonight is what Donald Trump reportedly said about sanctions. We got a readout from the call from the Kremlin's foreign policy advisor Yuri Ushakov afterwards, and he said, quote, Trump mentioned that the Senate in principle has a bill ready regarding new sanctions, but he himself is not a supporter of sanctions, but rather of reaching some agreements. Now, Keir Starmer and other European leaders thought they had US backing for tougher measures on Russia before this call if it didn't agree to an immediate truce. This suggests its hopes have quite spectacularly been misplaced. And if anything, it seems this call was more focused on bilateral relations rather than peace in Ukraine, with the Kremlin saying that the leaders discussed impressive prospect for ties, and that Trump spoke quite emotionally about a prospect for these relations. I think there will be a lot of emotions in Ukraine and other European capitals tonight, but those emotions won't be the same as Donald Trump's nor Vladimir Putin's.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's bring in James. So there hasn't been any clear breakthrough. I mean, James, when we think about, the campaign that Donald Trump ran, and you and I reported it, we were together at different points in the United States, and he often at these rallies spoke about the fact that he could end this conflict in 24 hours. I mean, that clearly hasn't happened.
That's right, Yalda. Yeah, he's the man who said he could solve this conflict in a day. It's turning out to be the deal that he couldn't solve at all. And, this call was spoken about as being pivotal. I think we are indeed at a pivotal moment in this crisis where Donald Trump and the United States is concerned. He posted on Truth Social his readout, his personal read on the call, and that bears out much of what Ivor has just been telling us, actually, in terms of the route ahead as Donald Trump would see it. He speaks about the negotiation, the path towards a peace being the job, the negotiating task of Ukraine and Russia themselves. He speaks about a ceasefire, but says that's very much their job. It reads like an American president who was a steward of this peace process, who laid out a proposed peace plan, who was very much a player and would very much have taken the credit had we got to the finishing line. Sounds to me like he is taking a step back in all of this. He makes no mention on Truth Social about his calls for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Makes no mention actually of sanctions, but does talk up the possibility of trade opportunities between the United States and Russia. Speaks about Ukraine's opportunities on trade as well. I think European capitals, along with Kyiv, will have serious questions about where the United States stands in all of this, because it's beginning to look very much like this evening they stand alone. President Zelensky, he has made a statement in which he queries the United States involvement and says that he doesn't have all the answers that he wants. And, just one thought I would add, Yalda, Ukraine's never been big in terms of the political landscape in front of Donald Trump, his priorities. In terms of the wider geopolitics, China's the big adversary. In that regard, that's why he's cozying up to Russia. That's why he wants a restoration of relations with Russia. Ukraine is small in the picture, and it's beginning to show.
Yeah, absolutely. James, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there from Washington. Well, let's bring in my next guest, Mikhail Kasyanov, former Prime Minister of Russia. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, there is no surprises here that Vladimir Putin is grinding everyone into the ground, especially Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's unfortunately the case. Just Donald Trump accepted Putin's proposal to negotiate conditions of unconditional ceasefire. That sounds strange, but it is fact. Unfortunately, that's the case. Even more than that, it looks like the United States is getting out of negotiation process. It means just that European leaders should step in and just lead all those, I wouldn't say negotiations, but some kind of efforts how to stop this bloody war.
Yeah, and we'll get to the thinking of European leaders in a moment and what leverage they have. But you have worked closely with Vladimir Putin, perhaps a different Vladimir Putin to what you're seeing today, or maybe he always had these sorts of tendencies. But what do you think he is thinking at the moment that perhaps, you know, his grand plan is going according to that? It's working?
He believes he is strong enough to continue this fight, to have summer offensive, and he believes that by autumn he will definitely would destroy Ukraine and would have better positions. Although he also believes that he could divide and destroy transatlantic unity. And that's what today's discussion with President Trump just shows, that Putin, to a certain extent, is right. Unfortunately, that is the situation. That's what Mr. Putin right now just looks like a winner, as a strong leader.
And in terms of where he has his eyes set, I mean, Europeans are often saying and worried that this isn't just about Ukraine or Ukrainian territory or Ukraine joining NATO. This is about Vladimir Putin having his eyes set firmly on beyond Ukraine. And that is that it's not just about the Ukrainian territory, that Europe as a whole should be worried about Vladimir Putin's ambitions.
That's correct. Mr. Putin said that let's discuss the new architecture of European security, of global security. He wants to sit down with President of the United States and just so that the whole world would watch two leaders to discuss and to agree the fate of the whole world, of nations, of different nations of the world. And he wants just these negotiations. And that's why he offers to President Trump to have bilateral negotiations and to put aside just a regional problem with Ukraine. Less Europeans will deal with this. And Putin just believes that he could overplay. And he already overplayed President Trump. Trump already accepted Putin's way of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Vladimir Putin's overall thinking, do you think there was a moment that the West could have capitalized on their relationship with him, that perhaps there are missed opportunities in hindsight, certain things could have been different?
There was a problem, of course, the problem in 2008, when Putin organized just invasion in Georgia. And 3 months after that invasion, just there was ceasefire agreement. And 3 months after ceasefire agreement signed, Putin didn't implement anything just, and then he decided that the West allowed him to perform this way. That is, he got a special ticket to have an aggressions. And then what we saw annexation of Crimea, and sanctions was very minimum as a result of annexation. And then we have just full-fledged invasion. Right now, Europeans understand, and I'm sure European leaders only now just came to the conclusion and understand who is Mr. Putin about. That's why they're so principled, and that's why they're so consistent. The problem is with President Trump.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see how this all pans out. Former Prime Minister Mikhail Kasyanov, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let's get the US perspective now, and I'm joined by former US Ambassador to Ukraine, William B. Taylor. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. We're just listening there to the former Prime Minister of Russia who had worked with Vladimir Putin in the early years. And he says the world is now clearly seeing who Vladimir Putin is. Do you think Donald Trump is seeing who he is?
No, I think President Trump is starting to see. We'll see how this latest phone call plays out. But there are indications that President Trump is beginning to understand that Putin is just dragging things out. He dragged it out in this phone call today, talking about exchanging notes and memoranda and writing up ideas. That's the Putin way of just dragging it out. So I think this will be clearer and clearer to President Trump.
Do you think then, in terms of where that leaves Ukraine, does this just turn into a war of attrition? And Donald Trump, you know, if he does have an interest in building this relationship with Vladimir Putin, puts that to one side and moves ahead with trying to forge some kind of alliance with Vladimir Putin?
No, I don't think that's what the plan is at all. I don't think we're talking about an alliance between the United States and Russia at the expense of Ukraine. No, I think it's very clear that this administration, up until now, has made the resolution of the Russian war on Ukraine its top foreign policy priority. It is not going to walk away. It clearly has spent a whole lot of time, of the president's time, vice president's time.
But that's not what we're hearing from J.D. Vance. That's not what we've heard from the president himself at different points. Is this a pressure tactic, do you think? Because J.D. Vance just a couple of days ago on Air Force 2 said it's not our war, and frankly, if we can't resolve it, we will walk away. And that's not the first time he's said that.
It's not the first time he said that, but he's also guaranteed that he's going to be engaged in this thing with the Pope. So he's been talking with a range of people, and I believe there has been a shift in the United States position in favor of Ukraine after that discussion in the Vatican at the funeral. That was a turning point where the United States changed its view, is beginning to change its view, beginning to understand that Putin is dragging things out. And you ask, how does this end? Well, yes, sanctions. Those are the sanctions that the Europeans have been discussing and providing, and threatening additional sanctions.
But do you think the sanctions are working, Ambassador? Because we've had, more than 2 years of severe sanctions that they've been bypassing.
They have been bypassing, and that's what needs to change. And that's what they're talking about doing. They're now talking about enforcing the sanctions. Also talking about additional big tariff, 500% tariffs, Senator Graham is talking about on any nation that buys Russian oil. That's got bipartisan support here in the United States, and President Trump understands that. So yes, I think the sanctions could be stronger. There are Russian banks that have not been sanctioned. I think the oil cap could go down from $60 to $50 a barrel. There are ways to put real economic pressure on Russia.
Why do you think that hasn't happened yet? Because we've continued to see under the Biden administration more and more sanctions piled up. The Europeans have backed it. And then we've seen evidence over and over again how those sanctions have been defied by neighboring countries, by Russia itself, by those who don't want to adhere to the sanctions. Why do you think this moment might be different to the past couple of years?
Because we've learned some things, Yalda. I think we've learned some things about how these sanctions have worked. As you say, imperfectly. There have been ways to get around them. The Russians have been able to export their oil through the shadow fleet. And now we are going after individual ships in the shadow fleet. There are ways to make these sanctions work better. And that's what they're talking about doing.
Ambassador, really grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Yalda.
Now, we know that countries like Russia and Iran have been actively recruiting in Europe and even here in the UK. Well, you may remember these mugshots. 6 Bulgarian spies jailed last week for a total of 50 years, targeting individuals who are of interest to Moscow. And more recently, 3 alleged Iranian spies were charged with targeting journalists based here in the UK so that serious violence could be inflicted on them. And that's why ministers want to introduce new powers to tackle state threats.
Let me be clear. We will not tolerate growing state-backed threats on UK soil. The Iranian regime poses an unacceptable threat to our domestic security, which cannot continue. Following this charging decision, I can confirm the Iranian ambassador has been summoned, and my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, is raising with the Iranian Foreign Minister in the strongest terms that the UK will not accept any Iranian state threat activity in the UK.
That was Home Secretary Yvette Cooper on the need to toughen up the UK's anti-terrorism laws to protect national security. It's an issue that we'll keep coming back to on this programme. Now stay with us, because coming up, Israel says the first basic aid in 3 months has entered Gaza. That's as world leaders threaten concrete action if the growing humanitarian disaster isn't addressed.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. Let's focus now on the threat to Israel from 3 world leaders. The UK, France and Canada have condemned Israel's renewed military offensive and the blocking of aid in Gaza. They've threatened targeted sanctions if Tel Aviv does not change course. There was some progress today. The Israeli military says 5 aid trucks entered the Strip after a 3-month blockade, but that, say international charities, is only a drop in the ocean, and a warning that this report from our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle contains images which you may find distressing.
Israeli special forces went into Khan Yunis this morning under the cover of heavy shelling and airstrikes. The IDF said that the target was a Palestinian militant. But as always, civilians were among the dead and wounded. Some of them were brought to the city's hospital on the back of a flatbed truck. Wake up, she's screaming. The body is her daughter Aline. This storage facility at the hospital was hit, destroying medicine. The hospital's director said that most of the supplies were for dialysis patients.
They claim they targeted a police headquarters. That place used to be a civilian police station before the war. Now it's just a storage area, what's left of the medical supplies from Nasser Hospital. This is the result behind me.
The Israeli military says its ground operation in Gaza is only just getting underway. They released these images of troops and tanks moving through Gaza. They've warned there is more to come. After an 11-week siege, Israel says it will now allow what it describes as basic levels of aid into Gaza.
We've been receiving reports that there is about 20 or 30 trucks or even less that are planned to come in. These are not confirmed reports, but the needs in Gaza are much, much higher than that. So we do hope that it's much more than just 20 or 30, because that's going to be a drop in the ocean amid this sea of needs.
Israel's finance minister today said that Gaza will be wiped out and suggested the entire population will be permanently removed.
The population will reach the south of the Strip and from there, with God's help, move to third countries under President Trump's plan. This is a change in the course of history, nothing less.
The IDF has now declared the whole of Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city, a combat zone, forcing tens of thousands to flee. Hussein has been walking through the night and the heat of the day.
I've been walking since 1 a.m. I'm heading towards the beach area. I'm helping my son. He's gone to get his wife and family now. He has 5 kids. We'll be together when he comes back.
With Israel's repeated threats to occupy Gaza, this now feels like an exodus, a slow, reluctant march to an unknown future, as the war again closes in around them. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, as the humanitarian crisis worsens, the Israeli finance minister has said that the military will keep conquering and ultimately expel all Gazans. Almost 3/4 of Gaza is now covered by evacuation orders. They were expanded significantly today around Khan Yunis, shown here in red. For now, the aid is being organised by the UN, but Israel says in the coming days it will begin a new plan to distribute aid through the use of private American companies. They have levelled 4 sites in southern and central Gaza in preparation. Satellite imagery shows the build-up of walls, barbed wire fences, and military personnel in those areas. Well, earlier today, our political editor Beth Rigby asked the Prime Minister and President of the European Commission about the developing situation. Let's have a listen.
UN's aid chief has warned action from the UN Security Council is needed to, quote, prevent genocide in the Gaza Strip. Do you think it is genocide? And can you, in good conscience, stand there as a leader and say you have done all you can?
It is a really serious, unacceptable, intolerable situation. And that's why we are working intensely to coordinate with other leaders how we respond to this, because it is intolerable, it is unacceptable, and we will continue to work in that way.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is unacceptable. For 2 months now, no humanitarian supplies have entered Gaza. Aid must reach civilians in need immediately, and the blockade on Gaza needs to be lifted now, because humanitarian aid must never be politicized. And we are calling for a resumption of the ceasefire and the immediate release of the hostages so that a permanent end of the hostilities can be finally achieved. We are convinced that the only solution is the two-state solution. This needs, among others, also a functioning Palestinian Authority.
Let's bring in Alexandra Sayer, Head of Humanitarian Policy and Advocacy for Save the Children International. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for joining us. So there's been no aid into Gaza since perhaps the end of February, early March, almost 3 months of no aid. We're now hearing today from the Israelis that they will allow limited aid in, but we're also hearing that that, of course, is a drop in the ocean of what's required.
Thank you so much for having me. Look, the stories that we have heard from our staff in Gaza these last few weeks have been absolutely harrowing. Not a single person in Gaza has enough to eat. Every single child in Gaza is facing famine. Parents tell us that they are resorting to absolutely desperate measures just to keep their children alive. Everything to feeding them animal feed, flour ground up in sand, leaves, grass. These are the conditions facing families in Gaza right now. So a few trucks of aid cannot be mistaken for meaningful progress. Gaza needs absolutely everything. The people of Gaza need food, they need medical supplies, they need clean water, they need fuel. The hospital system has been absolutely decimated. Every single newborn in Gaza faces the risk of death because the hospital system has been completely obliterated. So this really is barely a drop in the ocean in a sea of needs.
Yeah, we heard from Tom Fletcher last week as Cindy McCain spoken out about the fact that we are facing famine again in Gaza, and yet some of these facilities where people go to get checked whether their children or themselves, are suffering from malnutrition, actually are not at capacity because people can't get there as a result of because of the bombardment.
Exactly. Save the Children has a health clinic in Deir el-Bala, and we have seen a drop in the number of children coming into our clinic just to be screened for malnutrition. And a quarter of them we managed to actually reach, have been found to have acute malnutrition. So that means that many children who are malnourished are not getting enough to eat. Every single person in Gaza has told us that they are seeing intensified Israeli bombardment. It is unsafe to move around, and this is one of the other factors that is impeding aid workers from delivering assistance. Remember, more than 400 aid workers have been killed in the last 19 months of war. It is the deadliest place to be an aid worker. There is no safe place in Gaza. And in order for us to scale up, not only do we need supplies to flow through every single border crossing, we also need safety. We need to be able to move around, and we're just not seeing that at the moment.
Yeah, in terms of the supplies that Save the Children has, will it be part of this, the group of trucks or whatever that they're allowing in at this point, or will your trucks still be waiting at different crossings to enter?
We have trucks ready to go, but unfortunately, they will not be part of the trucks that will come in today or this week. We have everything from tents to food, medical supplies, as well as breast milk substitute for mothers who are malnourished and unable to breastfeed. These are the kinds of supplies that are also needed. It's not just about food. We need to be able to deliver the full range of humanitarian assistance to actually meet the needs of people in Gaza right now.
I just want to get your reaction, Alexandra, to this plan that we're hearing, reports of Israeli and American plans to sort of almost privatize the aid going into Gaza, take it away from the likes of the UN. Just your reaction to that, and how do people think that might work?
We're extremely alarmed to hear about this plan. This is not how we're going to be able to deliver assistance safely to families in need. What we know is that the plan will involve a reduction in the number of logistical hubs, and that's just not practical for children who have lost their parents, for people who are injured, who are disabled, for the elderly who can barely walk. This plan will not reach the most vulnerable people, and also it's not safe. We can't have armed actors involved in the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We've seen multiple times over the last several months how people have been killed waiting for humanitarian assistance, killed under Israeli bombardment. So the idea of having armed actors or reducing the number of logistical hubs is just not practical, and it is not going to work in Gaza.
Alexandra, I also just want to put to you what Israel continues to say. They say that the aid that goes in ends up in the hands of Hamas. Just your response to that, Save the Children, you've got, multiple people who work and operate within Gaza. What are they saying to you?
It's never been found that there has been large-scale aid diversion. What we see is that humanitarian assistance is just not going in, and the little that has gone in has just never been sufficient for the people in Gaza. We know that people over the last few weeks have been surviving on less than one meal a day. What we need to be able to deliver assistance safely is for all of the crossing points to open and for there to be a ceasefire. That is how we will be ultimately able to reach people in need safely and securely. And this is what's needed immediately.
Alexandra Saya from Save the Children, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, Brexit is back. Keir Starmer promises to put Britain back on the world stage with his EU deal. But what does the agreement really mean for the UK? Join us for that.
show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right, i.e. fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Welcome back to the programme. It's been a while since the late-night negotiations and the endless trips between Brussels and London. Today, the UK and the EU unveiled a new deal at their Showpiece summit. It's meant to reset relations with the Prime Minister, promising to leave the post-Brexit tensions firmly in the past. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Brussels top brass here in London. Brexit battles behind us now.
Is this a EU-UK reset?
The EU and UK have clearly made up, affection replacing acrimony in this new era of Anglo-EU relations. This UK-EU deal has been months in the making, and now the leaders are in there signing it off. Both sides will claim wins, but what is the UK giving up, and will the Prime Minister face a bit of a backlash? After the formal agreement, the big sell.
Britain is back on the world stage, working with our partners, doing deals that will grow our economy and putting more money in the pockets of working people.
The warmth in this room and between these two, genuine.
What we have agreed today is historic. But the message we are sending to the world today is equally, if not more important. We in Europe stick together.
You have given the European Union 12-year access to UK fishing waters, and you have agreed, having ruled it out last year, in principle to a youth mobility scheme. There are those today criticising you for backsliding on Brexit. Don't they have a point?
This is a comprehensive agreement. I look at how does it impact on working people? What are those supermarkets saying? What are those businesses saying? Because they're all welcoming it.
The celebratory mood continued on a tour of HMS Sutherland, an anti-submarine warship moored on the Thames. For these leaders, all of this a symbol of their defence alliance. But one possible battle ahead could be around how much of the EU's €150 billion rearmament fund the UK will be able to tap into. The EU's most senior diplomat acknowledging the tensions. There has been some reports that there is a view amongst some European colleagues and allies that there should be a limitation on the amount the UK should be allowed to access of that fund, given that we are not in the European Union. Is that correct?
Of course, these discussions are there. We have the wounds from Brexit very clearly. I mean, you wanted to exit European Union, and then there are many voices who say that you shouldn't have the same benefits from the European instruments that the European Union countries have.
The Conservatives already calling this deal a Brexit surrender.
This is a complete sellout. I am completely shocked that Keir Starmer has agreed to all of this, concession after concession. What he wants to do is just be able to say we're closer to the EU without working in the national interest.
Brexit has, for the past decade, defined the relationship between the European Union and the UK. And this today, then, this deal really is the beginning of a new era. It's been forged by a Prime Minister who is more instinctively pro-European, but it's also born out of necessity for both sides as they face into a more insecure world. This then is a new chapter. The big question is how it will be written in the coming months as two sides hammer out the details. The reset is now on in the spirit of reconciliation, but there will be hard bargaining ahead too. And Keir Starmer still needs to prove to the public this really is a win. Beth Rigby, Sky News, London.
Messages of support have been flooding in for Joe Biden after the former US president was diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer. King Charles, who's still undergoing his own cancer treatment, was among those to express their support for the 82-year-old. In his first public message since the diagnosis, Joe Biden shared, "We're strongest in the broken places." Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
The smiles mask the pain. Joe Biden took to social media for the first time since the devastating news of his advanced prostate cancer. The former president wrote, "Cancer touches us all. Like so many of you, Jill and I have learned that we are strongest in the broken places. Thank you for lifting us up with love and support." The former president has one of the most aggressive forms of the disease. It's already advanced to his bones, but his medical team are hopeful they can stop the further spread of the cancer with hormone therapy. And among world leaders who have been reaching out to Joe Biden is King Charles, who is himself battling the disease. Buckingham Palace confirmed the monarch had sent the former US leader a private letter of support. Joe Biden's last big public appearance was here at the Pope's funeral last month. President Trump has not spoken to Joe Biden, but did post a message on his social media. Melania and I are saddened to hear about Joe Biden's recent medical diagnosis. We extend our warmest and best wishes to Jill and the family, and we wish Joe a fast and successful recovery. Prostate cancer is one of the most common cancers in men, mostly affecting men over the age of 50 and becoming more common with age.
In men in their 80s, some would argue 8 to 9 out of 10 men will have prostate cancer. So if you biopsy 10 men of Joe Biden's age, 8 would have prostate cancer, whereas Joe Biden's is obviously a very aggressive form that will, if he's otherwise fit, will be what he dies of.
Joe Biden's health was a significant concern during his re-election campaign. His disastrous debate performance last June eventually forcing him to abandon his bid for a second term.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation.
Although he never publicly accepted it as a factor, saying instead he was stepping aside because it had become a distraction. Biden lost his eldest son, Beau, to brain cancer in 2015. Beau was just 46 years old at the time. And it was this loss that prompted Biden's cancer moonshot, a top administration priority with a goal of halving the cancer death rate over the next 25 years. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Washington.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, as the trial of Sean Diddy Combs continues this week, we hear from an attendee of his infamous industry parties.
Hello, I'm Anna Botting. Coming up on Sky News at 10, contentious debate over the New Deal between the UK and the EU. A lengthy call between Trump and Putin, and Gary Lineker's premature exit from the BBC. Those stories and more, see you at 10.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict.
There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it.
This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football. In Italy, everything is really organised. Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first. Help is slowly reaching these places. It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust. This is a picture of destruction. Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Now, we've been hearing more testimony today from the trial of music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. The rapper is facing multiple sex trafficking allegations in a high-profile court case in New York. He's pleaded not guilty to all charges. A former magazine editor who knew Combs personally has told Sky News that she and others in the industry were afraid of his temper. She sat down with our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer, and a warning: the report does contain flashing images.
In 90s and noughties New York, Sean Diddy Combs was the person to be seen with. What was it like to be moving in his world back then?
He really was sort of like the Pied Piper, if you will, of the most elite level, partying of that time.
Amy Dubois was the first black American woman to run a major mainstream magazine in the States, based in Manhattan at a time when hip-hop was at its zenith.
Urban culture really ran the city. That's where all, so much of the money was.
Behind the glamour, prosecutors now allege there was a man capable of sexual abuse, violence, and a serious abuse of power. Criminal charges which he's already pleaded not guilty to and strenuously denies.
Did people know not to cross him?
Yes.
And
yes.
What makes you say that? Well, the rumours, I guess, of what he could do.
There were a lot of people, within journalism, within media, and also within other industries that were afraid of his influence and also afraid of his temper.
Did you see him lose his cool ever?
Of course. When things at parties wouldn't go his way, or somebody didn't bring him something quickly enough, or if there was a sort of meeting and, the conversation wasn't going his way, he would just kind of, snap. And he was just not afraid to, yell at whoever was there. There was not a lot of boundaries in his communication, let's just put it that way.
Back then, a ticket to one of Diddy's star-studded white parties was the ultimate invite.
You walk in and it's like nothing you've ever seen before. This gorgeous crowd. His mansion was decked out. I mean, all the furniture was white. There were sort of people dressed as mermaids, in the pool. People were handing out, weed brownies, on silver trays.
For around 10 years, Combs had a relationship with the singer Cassie, which ended in 2018. Once over, she filed a lawsuit that both parties eventually settled, alleging she was trafficked, raped, drugged and beaten by the rapper on many occasions, which he denied. And we've since heard her say similar things in court.
And the last party that I ever went to, I think it was a party for post-Grammys and in 2017 or something like that, 2018. And it just, the vibe was very different. He was really kind of isolated in a corner with Cassie, looking very unhappy. Cassie did look very glassy-eyed, and there was a sadness about her energy.
For Diddy, his freedom depends on how these next few weeks go. His representatives claim he is the victim of a reckless media circus, saying he categorically denies he sexually abused anyone and wants to prove his innocence. In particular, they say, he looks forward to establishing the truth based on evidence, not speculation. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We'll be back at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. That's it from me and the World team. The news at 10 is up next. Good night.